All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on our monthly webinar. This month's webinar, we are talking about what is in the file. What are HR and employee documents do you need, where to keep them, how to store them, retention, and so forth. For those of you that haven't joined us before, we do a webinar like this every month. We do the third Tuesday of every month. We're going to talk about what those look like at the end, but certainly some good ones coming up as we finish out the year. So, quick introduction. So, I'm Chris Clough. I'm the president here at Paper Trails. I have Danielle Namath joining me here. She's our HR consultant, and she and I are going to kind of guide you through this today. So, certainly you're welcome to reach out to us. Either of us will have time for questions at the end. You can always throw things in the chat as we're working through, and we'll try to answer those as we go, or at the end for sure. We have plenty of time for questions. So, certainly, we know employee files are something, it's a chore that we all have to deal with. Certainly not one of our favorite chores, not one of mine as a business owner anyway. Most small businesses don't have an HR consultant or an HR person on their teams. And even here at Paper Trails, even though I have Danielle, she doesn't deal with any of our internal HR stuff, so it still all falls to me as that business owner. Now, we know employee files need to be organized, they need to be accurate, and we have to comply with federal and state laws to go with this. And as any of you that listen to our podcasts or check out our social or read our newsletters, things like that, we know DOL is federal and state DOL are giving us more and more fun tasks to deal with every day. So we got to keep on top of these things. Certainly, good records, save time with questions as they come up, whether that's from an employee, from a regulator, or even internally, right? You want to make sure you have all of those things available to you so that you can get them when you need them. You don't have to go searching for them. And certainly, as with everything in business, we want to make sure we have a good process for storing our employee files and being able to access them. And most importantly, protecting employees' privacy and their sensitive information. And Danielle will talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So I'm going to pass it off to Danielle, and she's going to start talking about the different types of files, and then we'll kind of go into each one of these specifically, and then we'll talk about retention and go from there. So Danielle, have a way at it.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Danielle, obviously the HR consultant here at Paper Trails. And like Chris said, talking about the importance of organized employee files. So if you think about employee files, and I just kind of want to give you a scenario. You think about your employee files and how it looks right now. So imagine if a auditor from either IRS or DOL walked in and asked to see Jane Doe's employee file. And you pull that employee file out, and it's got all of her information in there, and it's a thick folder, but they want to see specific information. So you're going to be sitting there, you're going to be thumbing through all of this paperwork. It's a stressful situation when they're standing there waiting for you to give them the documents they want. You might be pulling out documents while you're looking for that document, and they're now exposed to a lot of information that they shouldn't be privy to. So that's why it's important to have employee files and keep them accurate, keep them organized so that you can build trust. So the next time somebody walks in and says, I need this file, you can pull out a file folder and say, okay, here it is. What do you need? And you only have to go through two or three or maybe five papers versus a whole stack of them. So that's kind of the scenario to think about as we're talking about organization and the organization of employee files. So if you have one big file folder with all your files in it, I want you to start putting at least 4 to 5 other files within that one folder. So you'll have an employee, Jane Doe, and then you should have 5 other folders within her folder. The first folder will be your general, the first folder, and we'll get into the content of it, will be the general folder with general information. The next one will be a payroll file folder. Then you'll want to have a benefits file folder. We're going to talk about the I-9s and what to do with those I-9 forms later on in the presentation. Then you want to have another file folder that is medical confidential file folder. So in your general, the very first file, your general file, very the things you want in your general file would be things like your applications, your resumes, the background checks, and any assessments or tests. Those are additionally, you want like the employee handbook sign off, the acknowledgement form, any job descriptions you'd like, any job descriptions. And we'll continue. And then, of course, things such as trainings, including acknowledgement forms of harassment, maybe an acknowledgement form of harassment prevention. You probably want to have some certifications, like if it's a restaurant for safe serve, or if they need cannabis licenses, or if you have a DOT driver, or SHRM certification, any educational things that they have, you'd want those in that general form, in addition to any continuing education forms as well. And then we will continue. We'll talk about storage and retention a little later, but we'll continue. So that would be in your general file. Your next file form is going to be your payroll file form. And in that payroll file are things like your W-4s, things like direct deposits, things like your voluntary deduction authorizations, such as wage garnishments or permissions to deduct insurances or your retirement contributions.
Danielle, we get a lot of questions from clients about those kind of voluntary deductions, the benefits deductions. Can you speak a little bit to why those are important, the getting a voluntary deduction authorization?
Right. Anytime you impact somebody's paycheck, you need to have it in writing. You don't want to just start deducting payroll or deducting their paycheck without an authorization, because that could cause, it's illegal and it could cause a complaint. It's really for your protection, right? If you start deducting without a authorization form, an employee could report to DOL saying they're taking out for this and I never authorized it.
And
And
that
that
could include things like rent, uniforms. We see staff meals sometimes, in addition to those insurance or retirement type contributions.
Correct, correct. And though that's why you want to make sure that you have those authorization forms in your payroll file. So again, if DOL ever walks in and says, I want to see Jane Doe's authorization for her uniforms, if you don't have it, you might be liable to reimburse, because you really need permission before you can start deducting from your paycheck. Other things in the payroll records would be time cards, all of the corrections that are being made, just to make sure you have accurate pay practices, approval for overtimes, any managers' approvals for employees to working overtime, and then PTO and leave balances. And this one's a little tricky one. It's a gray area because it is PTO, so it could constitute as a benefit and be in the benefits form, but it can also be in the PTO because you're talking about accruals, you're talking about usages of PTO and balances. So if you keep PTO in the payroll form or in the benefits form, that's okay.
And we see a lot of these PTO questions, particularly now because of Maine's earned paid leave laws, whereas now you have to truly prove that they've been given the right balance, given the right PTO or earned paid leave, and they've been able to use it and so forth. So this is even more important now because there's regulation out there around this.
Correct. So your third file form is your benefits form, your benefits file. And your benefits file should include an open enrollment paperwork, waiver forms, beneficiary forms, and any other forms that have to do with benefits.
Yeah, I'll just speak very sadly. We had a client who lost an employee this spring, and they did not have beneficiary forms filled out and in the employee's file correctly, and they had some major issues with the insurance company. Obviously, the family had some issues. So I can't stress enough, making sure if you offer life insurance or retirement plans, make sure you have those beneficiary forms, make sure you're keeping them. on the file. In, God forbid something happens to someone, you are responsible for that as the employer. Most of these plans do not have any other way for the employee to designate a beneficiary other than that paper form that's sitting in your file. So.
The other form you want to make sure you have, and I may have said this, but the opt-out form. So if your employees decide not to take a benefit, then have that opt-out form as well.
And
So
just piggybacking on the last time we talked about those voluntary deductions, a lot of these enrollment forms have an acknowledgement that you can deduct from that employee's check to cover this or so forth, as usually as part of your enrollment process, whether you're using paper forms or you're using an online tool like what we have in isolved for enrollment or Employee Navigator or Ease or any of those systems. A lot of those have an automatic sign off on those as well, allowing you to deduct from their check. So,
thank you. Good point. So the fourth file within the employee file you would want to have is the performance file. And in that performance file, you're going to have reviews and any coachings or check-ins that may be documented that are setting the clear expectations for employees. You want to have development forms. What are the goals? Those goals should be in the employee file. Anything that's discussed between a manager and an employee that aligns with their growth. And then other things you'd want to have in the performance form is disciplines or any coachings that could lead up to disciplines, any performance improvement plans, or anything that is a record that creates fair and consistency and can show that within the employee forms. And then finally, the medical file. Now, before I get into the medical file, one of the things that people confuse is having a medical file and your workers' comp file. I'll tell you that your medical file should contain things like the employee's leave of absence, doctor's notes, or any type of medical documentation. If they're out sick and they bring you a doctor's note, if they have any supporting documents for their leave of absences, if they have an ADA accommodation, they need a sit-stand station with, or they need some other accommodation for work. Could be that you do random drug testing, and it could be that you have the selection process, as long as it only has their name or the results in the medical file. But when it comes back to workers' comp, what I want to say is that do not put your workers' comp information into your medical file. Workers' comp and OSHA are governed under a different entity than the others. So when an employee gets injured, you want to have a whole separate file for that workers' comp injury. Next one.
yeah, and Daniel, can you just speak specifically to the medical file? This is the most sensitive information that employers store, and some of these things might fall under HIPAA laws. Is that true? You just talk about the sensitivity of the medical files.
Yeah, of course. A lot, and actually, there's a lot of sensitivity in all of these files, right? And medical being one, obviously with the HIPAA laws, we want to make sure that your supervisors aren't seeing employees' medical information, right? They're not entitled to see what diseases or what injuries an employee has. It's on the need to know basis, which is kind of the whole point in having all of these files within the file folders. So when you have when you have a supervisor come in and they say, I want to see Jane Doe's file, you as the HR person can say exactly what do you want to see, because your supervisors, even your auditors that are walking in don't have the right to see everything in the employee file. So when a supervisor comes in and asks, what do you want to see? And he says performance, then you just give him that performance file, and keeping all of the other information protected. When you think about the medical, the right HIPAA need to know basis, your supervisors don't need to know that. When you think about enrollment forms, benefit forms have your spouse's information on there. It has your spouse's social security numbers, dates of birth, same with your children. Nobody's entitled to see that information, which is why we have this structure, this organizational, this payroll, this folder structure in each employee folder because that's what protects the employee and protects the employee's information. And that's why it's separate.
Absolutely. Thank you. Speaking of
So,
separate files, here we go, the I-9.
yes. So, like the workers' comp file being separate, the I-9 has to be separate too. The I-9 should not live in the employee's file for many different reasons. The first one is because the I-9 form is governed under the immigration. Um, I lost it. The immigration. Who oversees immigration, Chris? I'm totally blank at this point.
Well, Immigration and Naturalization Services oversees the I-9, right? So,
Thank
and
you.
certainly in this environment that we're in as business owners, we're seeing I-9 compliance come into play a lot. So this one's a really key one to keep an eye on.
Right. And so the I-9 form should be in a folder. So that way, if an immigration representative walks in and wants to see the I-9s of a specific employee, you can get out the folder and you can just pull out that I-9 and give it to them. I would obviously recommend that the binder, you keep them in a binder and the binder be kept in alphabetical order. But that's one reason why you want to keep the I-9 separate. The
So
I-9,
you're recommending, Danielle, rather than having a separate folder within the employee's file, that they keep a binder kind of on the side with everyone's I-9 and documentation separate. Is that correct?
correct. That is correct.
Perfect. Can you talk a little bit about the document review and verification, e-verify and so forth?
Yep. So when you do the I-9, and this is really important information, when you do the I-9 needs to be completed on day one. I've heard it before. Employers say, "Oh, I've got 3 days." Well, yes and no. The employee has to complete the I-9 form on day one. The employer completes section 2 within 3 business days of the employee's start date. And then, of course, it's the responsibility of the employer to review the documents from either list A or B and C. And it's the responsibility to make sure of the owner to make sure that the documents that are being presented to you are not expired and they're not photocopied. They have to be the original documents. And just again, photocopying isn't, even if it's a really good quality photocopy, it's maybe colored, it's not. It has to be the original documents that you have to verify.
Right. So
And
Danielle's saying they need to bring you their passport. They need to bring you their social security card. They need to bring you your license. They can't bring you a pre-made copy of that. You then would make your own copy from the file, but you need to verify the original first, correct?
correct, correct. And then, of course, as the employer, you want to verify or put it through e-verify. We always recommend e-verify as the government system where you can electronically check their eligibility. It only takes a few minutes, but I highly recommend the e-verify. But if you don't have or didn't sign up for e-verify, then of course, just really examine the documents, make sure they're official, and then verify and sign off on the I-9 form. And then, of course, as always, make sure you're checking off every single box on the I-9 form because blank boxes aren't really acceptable. So you either put an NA or a dash through it so that, if anybody ever comes to check, they know that you just didn't overlook it. Make sure you're properly filling out the dates and the addresses of the company addresses and of course your signature and the day you signed off on it.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, so we've unfortunately also had some clients go through some I-9 audits in the last couple of years, and what Danielle said is very important about, marking boxes NA or putting a line through them. That's something that they get, caught with. I mean, there was nothing wrong with any of the documents. All the employees were legitimate. It was literally just that they were blank boxes on the form, which you would think is kind of common sense. If it doesn't apply, we leave it blank. But they want it specifically said, either not applicable or crossed out or something like that, which is certainly a thing there. With E-Verify, we have an E-Verify integration through isolved. So through onboarding, when employees are going through onboarding, you can submit it automatically to E-Verify, and E-Verify will, take your electronic I-9 and go through that process and submit it out there, make sure that their verifiable documents are legitimate, make sure that they are applicable or allowed to work within the United States, and it sends you back a determination. I would say 9 times out of 10, you're getting a determination back almost instantly. If there's further checking that needs to be done, they'll get that back to you usually within a day or two. And sometimes it's a manual verification and so forth. But lots of I-9 stuff lately. This has definitely been a hot topic. So make sure your I-9s are up to date. Since we're talking about I-9s, Danielle, we have a question about, can we verify through a virtual format if we don't see the employees in person? So if they are remote employees, or if you're using, electronic onboarding like we use, is that okay to just use those electronic formats?
Typically, what I recommend employers to do is have like a notary sign off on it and go. That's what I typically recommend, because it's like I can't verify it personally, and it's our responsibility to verify it and make sure it's an actual document and it's not doctored. When you have remote employees, I mean, Chris, you might have something different, but I always tell employers is to have some kind of letter from a notary and their stamp that says, yes, they have seen the originals.
Yeah. And I
Those are,
don't know, and I think that's certainly the best CYA approach. But could you do a Zoom call the first day and have them hold up their license and their passport, and just kind of verify those you've seen, quote unquote, seen the documents? Do you think
you
that,
could.
and then
Uh,
they would send you the copies?
yes, you could.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. I would just be like, I would just make sure that you hold it and you can see every single detail. You can see the emblems. You can see, what's inside of like the social security card as far as the reporting the reporting agency. Because those are all things important to make sure you have the, verification that you're taking a close look at that information. And if we don't have any questions, we can talk about retention really quick. So retention for various records is different. For payroll records, it's 4 years, um, or at least 3 years for payroll records, 4 years for tax records. I-9 forms, you have to retain that for 3 years from the date of hire, or 1 year after termination, whichever is later, and then you can destroy them. I actually had a company I walked into, and I said, how are you getting rid of your employee files? And he said, I'm just throwing them in the trash. And this was like 2 years ago. You can't throw them in the trash because it has all of that information that we talked about earlier, the HIPAA information, social security, dates of birth, children's dates of birth. It's very important that you're destroying that documentation, whether it's in a shredder or you're burning it, but just to throw it out, it puts you at risk. And then, of course, you have benefits and ERISA documents, and they say you have to retain the records for up to 6 years. And then personal performance records is up to 2 years after termination. So that way, if there's any unemployment claims, you can respond to that. So in best practices, because with the benefits form, you have to keep to 6 years, I recommend that you keep all of your employee forms, your employee files, you keep them for at least 7 years. And then after 7 years, you're probably pretty safe to destroy them.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly we know from a tax perspective, income tax, kind of that 7-year rule applies as well. So I think that's a good rule of thumb. And this is the other reason why keeping things in separate folders is really helpful so that you can kind of go through once a year and cull through things and clean things out if you want to. So we've talked about all the different types of files, and certainly, we are paper trails, but I will tell you that I hate paper, and I have no paper employee files. We use the tools that are available to us. So within iSolved, for all of our clients, you already have access to document storage. Within iSolved, if you go to Employee Management and Human Resources, there is an Employee Documents menu item where you can go in and create. It already is tabbed out based on all of these different things that we've talked about, and the security is set appropriately. You can create subcategories and subfolders within there so that you can create all of the files that we've talked about and keep them electronically. That's totally acceptable. Uh, you know, if you're using onboarding through us, electronic onboarding, all of that is automatically getting electronically signed and stored for you, so you don't have to worry about that. If you're using the I-9 management, there's an I-9 workflow that will go through, allow you to complete that, upload all the document copies after you verified them, of course. And if you're using E-Verify, we can integrate right into that with a click of a button. You don't have to go out, log into E-Verify, manually enter the information, and so forth, and you'll get that response right back within the iSolve dashboard. So that's really nice. There are document storage dashboards, so you can go in and see. It makes a file audit a dream. Quite frankly, you can go in. You want to see everybody with an I-9 when it was completed, and maybe you want to see people that don't have an I-9 on file or don't have a W-4 on file, or let's look at everyone we don't have a beneficiary form on file for. That dashboard allows you to go through and see exactly who has what on file, when it was created, and when it will be applicable to destroy if you need to, right? So we can also set up alerts for license renewal, certification tracking, training refreshers. If there's re-acknowledgements that might need to be done in there, we can set up different alerts for those types of storage as well. So these do not have to be paper files. They can be electronic, totally up to you. We talked a little bit about process earlier, so making sure you have a good process is really important. Uh, and that's, you know, again, in this day and age, you also have to think about security. We want to make sure we use a safe and secure system. So digital, of course, nothing is infallible, especially these days. But definitely, keeping things electronic, digital, managing those permissions is an option. And you can set up role-based permissions so that, like Danielle said, the employee has access to see their files at any time, but supervisors might not, and only the HR folks can see those things. So really making sure that you get that, squared away is nice as well. And again, you probably want to go through once a year and you want to audit all of your files. You want to look through, are there things that we can destroy? Are there things that we need to keep or move to a different file? When someone leaves, you might want to put those files apart, separate those apart. Again, as part of your onboarding process, create an onboarding checklist. We, after this, are going to send out an employee file checklist for you based on all the things that we've created here, we talked about here. But just like you want to have a good onboarding checklist, we have spent a lot of time refining our employee onboarding checklist internally here. I think ours is like 7 or 8 pages now because we talk about all the things we need to get, all the things we need to keep organized, training requirements, and so forth. We also have created an offboarding process, an offboarding checklist. So when someone leaves, we don't forget to get, access cards back or keys back. We don't forget to terminate their email accounts. We don't forget to potentially move those employee files somewhere else. So creating good process is really, really, really important, and use the tools that are available to you. So it would not be a good webinar if we didn't give a shameless plug out for ourselves or for Danielle in particular. So we now do offer HR consulting services here at Paper Trails. Certainly, we a range of options. We do a full HR audit, helping you understand, any gaps that you might have in your HR processes. Really important. We're going to help you create kind of that basic handbook that you need. We talked about those onboarding and offboarding checklists. We're going to do that I-9 retention, help you put some processes in place. We can create give you labor law posters to keep you compliant with that. Moving to the next level, this is a more advanced or customized handbook. If you have specific industry or safety requirements that you might need to work on, we're going to help you create those development processes and performance review processes We'll kind of help you with those mandatory trainings, things like sexual harassment training. Again, we're going to put all these, help you implement and optimize all of the features that you already have in iSolve today, like onboarding, document storage, certification tracking. We're going to give you some project work as well as part of these packages. These are ongoing support packages. And with these packages, you get access for any one-off questions that you might need to come through as well. So don't be bashful about reaching out if you have any of those. Certainly, if there's any one-time projects or things that you might need, like salary surveys, investigations, if you need help with benefits analysis, any coaching, things like that, we're always happy to do that on a one-off basis as well, outside of those kind of reoccurring packages. But so we will, these, as always, this has been recorded. We will post this. We're also going to send out the slides and an employee file audit checklist for you. That'll probably go out tomorrow at some point and be posted to our YouTube, etc. Again, don't forget, reach out if you're interested in any kind of HR specific services. All of our resources are available at papertrails.com/documents. Tons of stuff out there. There's an HR 101 guide, HR compliance guide, so forth. We are actually doing 2 webinars next month. Our normal webinar is going to be hiring and managing foreign workers. So if you're recruiting for H-2Bs, J-1s, those types of things, we're going to give a lot of information on how to go about that and things that you need to do. We are doing a special webinar on October 9th with Strategic Talent Management, our friends over there. We are seeing a lot of clients struggling, the industry, the market's softening, and we're going to talk about investing in your people and why they are the key to your long-term success. So we're going to talk about kind of some low-cost strategies to implement that can keep employees engaged, happy, and so forth. That's going to be on the 9th at 2 o'clock. So 2 webinars next month. And if you go to papertrails.com/webinars, you could sign up for those as well. So happy to answer any questions. I've got a couple here, Danielle, to get going. Feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A. First question, Danielle, is about contractors and freelance workers. So what do you suggest for files for freelance workers, contractors, and those W-9s that the contractors fill out? Should those be in a separate binder? Can those be put together in just a single file?
Yeah, so have a single file. Typically you're not supposed to keep records on people who aren't your employees. So like temporary employees, they're not your employees. If you have complaints, you go to their employer and you give them the information, and they're the ones who should be keeping the files. Um, if it's like a W-9 employee and you have an individual contract, then they're not an employee. So just keep a file for them. But those files should only have the contract in it. They really shouldn't have anything. You shouldn't be performance management managing these people. You shouldn't be having any payroll records or taking any information. You shouldn't have social security names, dates of birth. They shouldn't receive any benefits. So again, you shouldn't have employee files because they're not employees. Just a simple folder that says contracts, and maybe that has your agreement with the contractors in there, but you shouldn't be having
Yeah, and
employee.
I would just piggyback. So certainly you want to go through your vendor due diligence process. If you are doing a vendor due diligence process, certainly if you are kind of in the construction world, your workers' comp company is probably going to want copies of their insurance as well. So you can keep those. But again, these are not employee files. There's not a lot of sensitive information in here. The W-9 is probably the most sensitive information because there's an EIN on there. But those can be kept in a separate file. There's nothing, no specific regulations or anything like that that kind of go along with that. So there was a question, should we be recording those kind of virtual I-9 meetings if people are holding up their passports? I certainly don't think that that's going to hurt if you record that and save that, Danielle. You
Right.
agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Put it right in the employee file.
Yep. One question, how often do you need to update the W-4? Best practice is every year. I can tell you nobody does that. Generally speaking, it happens when there's a change. So it's, once when they start, and, usually once a year, some people get their taxes done. They're like, gosh, I didn't have enough withheld or I had too much withheld, and they want to make a change. Again, guidance says you should get a new W-4 every single year. I promise you, as the payroll professional in the meeting, that does not happen. But so
I recommend that when you're doing open enrollment, if it's towards the end of the year, then have them fill out a new one.
And that's a great suggestion too. So, question from the I-9. Do you have to keep copies of the documents used for the completion of the I-9? Yes, absolutely you do. Workers' comp files. Would you recommend keeping files by injury or by employee? So by incident or by employee?
By incident.
Great.
You might have, if you have your OSHA, it should go in according with your OSHA log, right? So if you have an incident in 2024 and OSHA walks in and wants to see the past 4 years, then you should have those files according to the years. So like, they can look at an injury in October of 2024. Hopefully you have them divided into months, and then you can pull out that October 2024 injury folder, and there it is.
Excellent. If we have medical documents related to short-term disability, should that be kept in the medical file? I would assume it should not be kept in the benefits folder. If that's the case, would a notice about benefits awarded for short-term disability be then kept in the benefits folder separate from relevant medical documents? So sounds like keeping the claim documents. The question is, should we keep the claim documents and reimbursements in the benefits folder and any medical information we keep in the medical folder? Is that a fair statement? Danielle, do you agree with
Yeah,
that?
I agree with that.
Great. Do you have to keep any documents if a person was not officially hired as an employee? So I'm assuming things like applications that you might have, or if someone's, maybe starts the process and never starts, they may fill out, some paperwork and then they ghost you or never start. What say you about that, Danielle?
Yeah, so you should have a recruitment file, right? You should have a recruitment file and all your interview notes, everything goes into the recruitment file. For an employee who maybe you started the process and they didn't show up on that day one, then have that file and just leave it as an inactive employee and move on. But pre-employment records, interview notes, those things should be in your recruitment file.
Yeah, and certainly, this is very rare, but if someone came back to you after they went through an interview process or hiring process and said you discriminated against them for something, any documentation you have these days is better than no documentation. And certainly if you're using things like applicant tracking systems like we use within isolved, that will help you document your conversations, it'll help you document your recruitments and so forth. And again, you don't always have to have paper files. You can be using systems. We know we use timekeeping. That is your timekeeping records. You don't have to have paper files of all those things, but you need to be able to produce them when someone comes and asks, whether that's the employee or a regulator. Same thing with these types of things. It doesn't have to be physical folders. Certainly can just be kind of different systems and processes that you use across the board. So, another one, would you recommend employers start recording when employees voluntarily go home early versus being sent home early given the new law LD 598? If so, tips on how to do that efficiently. So we've been having conversations internally about LD 598, which for those of you who don't know, the state of Maine just passed a law this summer, this spring, that says if employees are sent home, essentially you have shortened their shift after they have come to work less than 2 hours, essentially, you have to pay them for a minimum of 2 hours. And there are some exceptions for inclement weather. If you try to notify them and they don't respond, that they don't need to come in, you don't have to do that. But definitely, again, my guidance on that, Nate, would be that if they voluntarily go home, right? So if they come in and it's quiet, in the restaurant, and they say, "Hey, can I be cut?" I don't think it's going to hurt you to have something in writing saying, they wanted to go home, we didn't send them home, right? Danielle, would you agree with that?
I would agree. I would just say, yeah, you want to go home early, initial this, initial your time card that says you agree to go home early.
Yeah.
Or,
And again,
we're having,
it wasn't you asking them, it was them saying, "Hey, it's quiet, can I go home?" Right? That's, I
yeah.
think, the scenario you're talking about, Nate. So, but yeah, lots of conversations with LD 598. There have not been any official rules or guidance published by Department of Labor quite yet, even though the law goes into effect next week, September 24th. We are still waiting for that. We've talked about these scenarios. I think Nate is in the restaurant hospitality industry. I think that's probably the most common industry where this law is going to come into play. But even still, I think, the occurrences are going to be fewer than people worry about. Certainly something you have to think about, but not something that I think is going to happen every day. So, does the I-9 need to be completed again if a document expires, like a license or a passport?
I would say no, unless it is a JB worker or, an an HJ worker. But I would say for your regular American
Yeah, so
citizen.
if there's an employment authorization, if there's an employment visa, something like that, when that expires, you certainly want to have a reauthorization. What happens a lot is you have an H-2B employee or a J-1 employee. They come, their employment authorization is valid until September 15th, for example. Uh, if they essentially turn into a pumpkin on September 15th and can no longer work, so you need further documentation if that has been extended before they can continue to work. So on normal documents, no, only on those work authorization for work visas would be the answer. Question, this is on the LD 598, the report to work law. Would this also apply to a situation in the restaurant that it's slow and the employer asks if anyone would like to be cut and they volunteer? I would say you are in that situation, you as the employer are sending someone home, and that kind of 2 hour minimum would apply uh, because you as the employer are saying we want to send someone home, right? If the employee came to you and said, hey, gosh, it's really slow. Can I go home? That would be a situation where they could sign off and kind of waive that right. But where you, as the employer, are initiating that, my interpretation would be that that law would apply. And I think the moral of the story all around is document, 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 document. None of us are good enough at it. All of us will be caught for not having enough documentation on something at some point. Unfortunately, we are in a very highly, as employers, we are more highly regulated than we ever have been. And certainly, the more we can have on file to prove that we're doing things the right way or trying to do things the right way, the better these days. So, but that's kind of the end of the Q&A that I've got here. Certainly, you're welcome to reach out to us anytime. We're happy to answer questions. Certainly, reach out to any of our contacts here at Paper Trails if you have further questions on anything we've talked about. Otherwise, we will see you next month for our 2 webinars. Hopefully, you'll join us as well. Register online at papertrails.com/webinars. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next month.